I still think about the slap sometimes. Not because it was violent exactly. It wasn't that kind of slap. It was the kind that happens when someone's hand moves before their brain does, when something buried way too deep finally cracks the surface and comes out wrong. The kind that leaves everyone in a room completely still afterward, like the air itself doesn't know what to do next. The little girl didn't cry right away. She just sat there touching her cheek with 2 fingers, and she looked at her mother like she was seeing a stranger wearing her mother's face. But here's the thing that nobody tells you about moments like that one. The slap wasn't really the most disturbing thing that happened that day, not even close. Let me start from the beginning. Her name was Linda, and the first time I truly understood who she was, she denied my expense reimbursement because she was in a bad mood. Not for any professional reason. She didn't pull me into a meeting room and explain a budget issue. She didn't send a policy-compliant email. She just looked at the form I'd submitted, set it down on her desk without signing it, and said, "Come back next week," in that voice she used when she had already made a decision and wasn't interested in your reaction to it. I stood there for a second trying to figure out if I'd misunderstood something. I hadn't. That was the version of Linda I knew first. The one who ran on mood and leverage and the unspoken understanding that she had the chairman's ear, so crossing her, even accidentally, even just by existing near her on a bad day, had a cost. Nobody in the office liked her, not genuinely. They respected her or they feared her or they were careful around her, but actual liking? No, she was too much, too calculating. Too aware of exactly how much power she held at any given moment and exactly how to use it. But then she came by my desk a week later. She sat down in the chair across from me, just pulled it out and sat down without asking, which was so like her, and she folded her hands on the edge of my desk and she said, "I owe you an apology. I was dealing with something last week that had nothing to do with you, and I took it out on your paperwork. Your reimbursement will go through by Friday." She said it like it cost her something. Like the words were being pulled out of a place in her chest that didn't open easily. I didn't know what to do with that. People who operate the way Linda operated don't usually acknowledge it. They just keep moving forward and expect you to keep up. The fact that she'd come back, that she'd sat down and looked me in the eye and said the actual words, that did something to my understanding of her that I couldn't quite undo. That was Linda in a single portrait. Capable of being genuinely cold and thoughtless, and then turning around and being more nakedly human than most people you'd ever meet. I never fully trusted her after that first incident. But I never fully didn't trust her either. Most of our colleagues kept her at arm's length and I understood why. Being around Linda felt like standing near something electrical. You never quite knew if the current was running until you were already touching it. The chairman adored her. This was not a secret. It was one of those office facts that everyone knew and nobody said, like knowing exactly who was about to be laid off 2 months before it was announced. He had this expression when she spoke in meetings. This carefully controlled expression that was trying very hard not to be impressed and failing in small, visible ways. She had a voice that did things to a room, soft and a little musical, warm in a way that felt personal even when she was talking about quarterly projections. She knew exactly what that voice did. She used it deliberately. But I always believed there was something underneath the strategy. Something in her that genuinely wanted to be seen, not just useful. Some real person under all the armor. When the chairman retired, that armor started cracking. She smiled more after he left. But it was the wrong kind of smile, too wide, too automatic, the kind you wear when you're in pain and running out of the energy to hide it. She started mentioning casually that she'd taken up yoga, that she and her husband were swimming together on weekends, that things at home were wonderful, that she was healthier than she'd ever been. She lost weight fast. When people mentioned it, she said she was just eating cleaner. I pretended to believe her. It felt like the kindest available option. Her promotion never came through. The approvals dragged on the way they always did in a company like ours, bureaucracy moving like refrigerated syrup, and eventually just went quiet. No formal rejection, no conversation, just silence where an answer used to be. She kept smiling. That was roughly 3 years before she called me on Dragon Boat Festival. My phone buzzed while I was thinking about food. Specifically about zongzi, the sticky rice dumplings my grandmother used to make, wrapped in bamboo leaves and steamed until the whole kitchen smelled like something between grass and sugar. I'd been vaguely planning to pick some up on my way home and the phone interrupted that thought. I looked at the screen, felt a small, specific weight drop into my stomach, not dread. More like the feeling of knowing that the next portion of your evening is going to ask something of you that you hadn't planned to give. Like seeing a name on your calendar that you'd forgotten about. I answered anyway. I haven't seen you in forever. Her voice was exactly the same. Warm, slightly musical, with that undertone of intimacy that made you feel like you were the only person she was thinking about. I've been thinking about you. I've been thinking about you too, I said, which was not really true. Let's have dinner, my treat. I set down what I was holding, because that right there was how I knew something was wrong. Linda did not offer to pay for things without a reason. It wasn't that she was cheap. She wasn't particularly. It was that she understood the architecture of obligation better than almost anyone I'd ever met. She knew what it meant to owe someone something. She knew what favors cost. She had built her entire professional existence on the careful management of who owed what to whom, and she never extended credit without a reason. If she was offering to treat me to dinner, she needed something she couldn't just ask for directly, something that required softening first. You don't have to do that, I said. Yes, I do. A short pause. There's something I want to talk to you about. I agreed to meet her, and then I went to the ATM on the way there because there was no version of that dinner where I was letting her pick up the check. The restaurant she'd chosen was on the upper floors of the newest skyscraper in the city center. One of those revolving places that completes a full rotation over the course of a meal, so you get a slow panoramic view of everything below. It was styled after the Pearl Tower in Shanghai, all curved glass and cold steel and the kind of lighting that makes everyone look like they belong there. The waitresses moved between tables in fitted cheongsams, unhurried, deliberate, like the whole room had been choreographed. From up there you could see the whole city laid out beneath you, office buildings and apartment towers and the older neighborhoods that were being slowly absorbed by the newer ones. The kind of view that makes you feel simultaneously large and very small. Like history is happening all around you and your personal problems are footnotes. I was on my second glass of water when Linda walked in. I almost didn't recognize her. She was fanning herself with a folded handkerchief, weaving between tables with the apologetic body language of someone who knows they're late and hates that they are. Her hair was up, but not the way she usually wore it, not with intention, more like she'd put it up in the car without a mirror. Her makeup was almost nothing. The barest minimum, maybe not even that. She looked like a person who had been awake for a very long time running on something that was burning out. I had known Linda at her peak. Shaped eyebrows, tailored blazers, the kind of makeup that takes longer to apply than the heavy kind and looks like you're barely wearing any at all. Even after she'd come back from maternity leave, she'd walked into the office every morning looking assembled in a way that made people respect her and resent her simultaneously. She'd worn her appearance like a second professional credential. None of that was present tonight. She sat down across from me, apologized for the traffic before I could say anything, waved it off herself, and then said, "My daughter Emily," and I felt something in my chest loosen by maybe 40%. A child problem? That was something I could handle. Something contained, with edges. She talked about Emily the way mothers talk about their children, with that specific combination of objectivity and complete irrationality that exists nowhere else in human relationships. Emily was intelligent, more intelligent than the other children in her class. Sharper, more capable. Linda said all of this with total certainty, the way you state facts about the physical world without any apparent awareness that perspective might be distorting the picture. What happened? I asked. She lost an election was what happened. A classroom election. Third grade maybe, class representative, the kind of role that in the adult world would be called student council but in an 8-year-old's world is everything. Status, visibility, the confirmation that your peers see you the way you see yourself. Emily had lost by 3 votes. The boy who beat her had taken his classmates out to KFC the week before the election and bought everyone chicken sandwiches and fries, and then he won. That's bribery, Linda said, her voice had gone flat. They're calling it democracy and it's bribery. I almost smiled, caught myself. They're 8 years old. Don't laugh. She looked at me directly, not angry exactly. Something more exhausted than angry and more serious. This is their first lesson about how society works, don't laugh at that. And then she started crying, not for effect, not the kind of crying that wants to be witnessed and comforted. She cried the way people cry when they've been holding something for a long time and their grip finally just fails, quietly, almost carefully, like she was embarrassed by it and trying to minimize the visibility. She told me about watching Emily after the loss. The way the girl had gotten quieter, stopped reaching for her phone, stopped bringing up her friends in conversation. How she'd walk into a room and then stand there for a second like she'd forgotten her reason for entering it. How she'd stopped raising her hand in class. Linda had noticed every single thing. The precision of it was remarkable, the way she cataloged each small behavioral shift, each withdrawal. She wasn't observing her daughter from the outside. She was monitoring her from somewhere much closer than that. I sat there watching Linda describe her daughter's withdrawal, and I thought about Linda herself after the chairman left. The too-wide smile, the yoga and the swimming. The weight disappearing and the explanation that it was just healthier eating. The way she'd recalibrate herself at doorways before entering rooms, like checking her armor before going into battle. Watching Emily go quiet, I thought, must have been like watching a very specific kind of mirror. She wanted me to help. I knew the school's principal from years back when I'd worked briefly in education. She wanted me to arrange a meeting. She wanted someone to look into the election. She wanted, though she didn't say this, not exactly, for someone to make it right. I should have said no. I said yes. Looking back, I think the thing I missed in that conversation, the thing sitting right there in the open that I walked past without seeing, was how Linda talked about Emily's reaction. She kept saying Emily was devastated. Emily was crushed. Emily deserved to win. She never once said Emily would be okay. Most parents, when they're upset about something that happened to their kid, there's this thread of reassurance underneath the distress. Some baseline belief in the child's resilience. The way they phrase things carries this hidden assumption, this is hard, but she'll come through it. Linda never said anything like that. She talked about Emily's suffering with a kind of intensity that was slightly wrong. Too consuming, too personal. I didn't understand that until later. The principal was uncomfortable from the moment I called him. He agreed to help because he owed me a favor from years back and because he had the kind of temperament that made it genuinely difficult to say no to people he liked. But when we sat down in his office, there was an expression on his face that I'd seen before, the expression of someone who already knows how a story ends and is dreading having to watch the middle. He arranged a meeting with Emily's teacher, Miss Huang. She'd been at the school for close to a decade, taught third grade, and had that particular quality of experienced teachers who have seen so many versions of every possible situation that surprise has simply stopped being available to them. She walked into the meeting room already done with us. Not rude, she was too professional for rude, but there was a very controlled quality to her neutrality, the kind that comes from managing something difficult. Your colleague has come to see me multiple times about this election, she said, setting her folder on the table without looking at either of us directly. I want to make sure I understand, you both believe that a third-grade class representative election requires this level of intervention? Linda stayed composed. I was genuinely impressed. She thanked Miss Huang for her time, laid out Emily's qualities systematically, organizational instinct, the way other children oriented toward her naturally, her reliability, her communication skills. She made a careful, structured argument. Miss Huang listened with her hands folded on the table, then she opened her folder. The child who won is also excellent, she said. I want to show you something. She slid a page across the table. This is the academic performance record for the class, the full year. Linda looked down at it. The boy's name sat at the top, every assessment, every test. Every tracked metric from September to present. Emily was fourth, sometimes fifth. The silence that followed had weight to it. Grades aren't the only measure of leadership ability, Linda said carefully. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the effort in it. No, Miss Huang agreed. But the election wasn't only about leadership, it was about which student the class trusted and preferred. That's its own valid outcome. She paused. And children do need to learn that competition includes losing. That failure is something you move through, not something that requires adult intervention to reverse. The process wasn't fair. Linda's voice sharpened slightly. The boy took children out to dinner before the vote. He purchased their support. Something shifted in Miss Huang's expression. It was subtle, the kind of shift you might miss if you weren't watching closely. A small tightening around the eyes, a brief intake of breath. She folded her hands a fraction tighter. I need to tell you something, she said, quietly, careful. Emily was the first child to give gifts to classmates before the election. Nobody said anything. I looked at Linda. She had gone a very specific color, not quite pale, not flushed, but somewhere between the two. The color of someone confronting a fact they'd been keeping just outside the edge of their awareness. She invited students in groups, Miss Huang continued. She gave them small gifts. Several parents contacted me about it because their children mentioned it at home. I became aware of it before the vote. Linda opened her mouth. Closed it? Emily started it, Miss Huang said. The words were even, completely without cruelty. She wasn't trying to wound, she was just finishing what needed to be said. The boy responded in kind. He had more resources or more friends willing to go along with it. But Emily moved first. The principal made a sound that wasn't quite words yet, the preliminary noise of someone about to suggest a compromise, and Miss Huang stood up and gathered her papers. She left without saying goodbye. We walked out of that school building into thick June heat. The air had that summer weight to it, warm and slightly wet, the kind that sits on your shoulders like something physical. Neither of us was talking. I was trying to process what I just heard and also trying to figure out how much of it Linda had already known. Because that was the question that kept surfacing. Had she known Emily went first? Had she known on some level and come to that dinner and cried and asked for my help anyway? I didn't ask her. I should have, I didn't. We were almost to the parking lot when I saw the small figure near the road. Emily. She was standing alone by the curb, slightly too still, in the way that children stand when they're waiting and uncertain whether what they're waiting for is actually coming. She was watching the passing cars like she was counting them. Linda saw her at the same moment I did. And something happened to Linda's face, a flash of something I couldn't quite name, not surprise, not quite guilt, something more complicated than both. We took Emily to a cafe nearby. One of those small bright places with laminated menus, and a freezer display case and air conditioning cranked up to the point where you need it immediately after coming in from the heat. Emily ordered a fruit drink and sat across from us sipping it through a straw, her eyes moving between her mother and me the way a child's eyes move when they know the adults around them are managing something. She was perceptive. More perceptive than I'd expected. Linda asked her carefully, gently, whether she had really given gifts to her classmates before the election. Emily looked confused, not guilty, not defensive. Confused, the specific confusion of someone who doesn't understand why they're being asked to confirm something that was already agreed upon. You told me to, she said. Linda went very still. You said, Emily was working to remember the exact words. You could see the effort, the concentration. She was a precise child and she was trying to be precise. You said nobody votes for free. You said everything in society has a price. You said I needed to make them feel like they owed me something before I asked for their vote. Nobody spoke. At the next table, a woman glanced over at the silence. Emily, Linda started. You said it. Emily wasn't accusatory. She wasn't angry. She had the manner of a child who has been praised her whole short life for being accurate and was simply being accurate now. You told me what to do and I did it. You said that was how things worked. There are moments where you can feel the temperature of a conversation change. Not metaphorically, something almost physical, something in your chest or your throat that knows before your brain articulates it that what is about to happen cannot be undone. Linda's hand moved before anything else in her did. The sound was sharp, too sharp for a small cafe, too sharp for the size of the moment. Everything stopped. I mean that literally. The woman at the next table stopped mid-sentence. The person behind the counter looked up. The ambient noise of the place, the refrigerator hum, the distant music, all of it seemed to pause and create this pocket of silence that the sound of the slap sat in the middle of. Emily didn't cry. Not at first. She put 2 fingers against her cheeks slowly like she was checking whether what had just happened was real. And she looked at her mother. With those eyes, big, careful, precise eyes, and the expression on her face was not what I expected. It wasn't fear, it wasn't even pain exactly. It was the expression of someone who has just had a door open that they didn't know existed and is now looking through it and seeing the room on the other side. Recognition. Understanding. The look of a child who has just learned something true about the world and about herself and is filing it away. I got my arm around her shoulders and pulled her toward me. She pressed her face against my sleeve and shook once, one single brief tremor, and then went very still like she'd made a decision. Linda had both hands pressed over her mouth. The sounds she made weren't crying. They were worse. They were the sounds of confronting something you cannot explain away or reframe or manage or survive with your composure intact. The sounds of something breaking that had been under pressure for a very long time. I held Emily and said nothing. There was nothing available to say. What I found out later, not that day, not that week, but eventually, was that Emily had known, not all of it, not consciously, not in the way an adult knows things. But children absorb more than we let ourselves believe, and Emily had been living inside her mother's logic her whole life. The way Linda talked about the world, the way she explained how things worked, the way she described competition and strategy and the cost of wanting things, Emily had been marinating in that worldview since before she was old enough to analyze it. She hadn't been following instructions. She'd been applying principles she'd been taught without anyone calling them that. And the thing that is hard to sit with, even now, even all this time later, is that the principles weren't wrong. That's the part that stays with me. Linda's understanding of how people work isn't some cynical aberration. Reciprocity is real. Social debt is real. People do vote for who fed them, not always, not only. But it's not true. The mechanism Linda described, making people feel something before asking them for something, that is a real thing that real adults do in real boardrooms and real political campaigns and real friendships, all the time, every single day. She wasn't wrong about the world, she was wrong about everything else. She called me a few days after the cafe, not to talk about what happened, not to acknowledge it. She called to tell me that Emily was going to run in the re-election. The principal had offered one. In the aftermath of the meeting, caught between a furious teacher and a distressed parent, and probably a few complaints he hadn't mentioned to me, he decided that the cleanest solution was a fresh vote with clear ground rules. She's going to run, Linda told me. Her voice was composed, slightly brittle around the edges but composed. We don't back down from things, she's my daughter. I heard the sentence underneath that one, the one she was actually saying. The one that was about herself and not about Emily at all. I told her gently that maybe letting it go was also an option, that Emily didn't need to win this particular election to be okay. She'll be fine, Linda said. And then she said it again. She'll be fine. She asked if I would come with her to visit Miss Huang at home, bring some gifts, smooth things over before the re-election. I told her I thought that was a bad idea. She heard me out, waited until I'd finished, and then said she was going anyway. I found out later what happened. Linda showed up at Miss Huang's apartment building with wine, eggs, premium milk from some specialty shop, a full arrangement, the kind of gift-giving that signals seriousness and resources and the expectation of a warm reception. Miss Huang opened her door, looked at the bags, looked at Linda. I have been teaching for 20 years, she said. I do not accept gifts from parents. She closed the door, not slamming it, just closing it, firmly, completely. Before Linda had finished speaking, I thought that would be the end of it. That the door in the face of a gift she'd brought to someone's home on top of everything else, the meeting, the revelation about Emily going first, the cafe, would be enough. That Linda would process all of it and arrive at the conclusion that sometimes the answer is to stop. It wasn't. The re-election was held on a Thursday. The original winner had withdrawn. His family, from what I heard, had decided that the whole situation had become too much. Too many conversations with teachers, too much attention, too much disruption to something that was supposed to be a simple third-grade activity. They pulled him out of the running quietly and without explanation. I felt bad about that. I still do. He'd done nothing wrong. He'd done exactly what Emily had done, just more effectively. The fact that it had cost him anything was entirely the result of an adult unable to let her daughter experience a loss. Emily ran against 2 other students. She lost, by more than 40 votes. Not 3, 40 plus. In a class that probably had 30 students in it, she lost by 40 votes, which meant the math required something specific. It meant that children who might have been undecided, children who hadn't strongly preferred either candidate initially, had moved. Had made a choice. Children communicate things to each other that adults can't see. They have their own information networks, their own sense of which situations are charged and which are safe. Somehow, in the weeks between the first vote and the second one, a significant number of those third graders had decided something. Linda didn't call me after that. She didn't have to. We still worked in the same building. Still passed each other in hallways. She smiled every single time, that wide, bright, carefully maintained smile, and I smiled back, and we never talked about any of it. The dinner, the school, the meeting, the cafe, the slap, the second election. Some things exist in a category of events that are too real to be discussed. You just carry them alongside each other in parallel without making them words. 6 months passed, then she called. Emily became class representative, she said. Her voice was warm, proud, relaxed in a way I hadn't heard in a long time. She's first in her class academically now, first. Can you believe it? That's wonderful, I said, and I meant it. I was genuinely glad. Whatever Emily had moved through, the election, the cafe, all of it, she'd come out somewhere good. She was a resilient child. That matters. That's not nothing. I asked a few questions. Linda answered them with all her old warmth, that charm that had kept conference rooms paying attention to her for years, and I let myself feel something uncomplicated and just be happy for them. I let it go. 2 weeks after that, I ran into the principal. We had coffee, a different cafe from any of the ones that had featured in this story, which I was grateful for. We talked about nothing for a while, the city's new transit development, a former colleague who'd taken a position up north, the heat that year. Then he put his cup down. Your friend resolved it herself eventually, he said. I know. Emily's doing great, apparently. He nodded. He had a specific way of nodding when he was choosing how much to say. She transferred her, he said. I looked at him. Linda enrolled Emily in a different school. Did it a couple of months ago. He said it carefully, watching my face. Emily is class representative at the new school, first in her class there too. I sat with that for a moment. She didn't mention it, I said. You didn't know? I shook my head. He didn't add anything. We finished our coffee, talked about other things, said goodbye in the parking lot. I sat in my car for a while before I turned the key. I kept thinking about the architecture of it. The precision of the solution. Linda had not, in the end, convinced anyone at that school to change the outcome. She hadn't won the argument with Miss Huang. She hadn't reversed the second election result. She hadn't gotten any institution or authority to bend in the direction she was pushing. She'd done something much simpler. She'd moved to a place where the history didn't exist yet. New school, new class. New children who hadn't watched any of this play out. No record of the first election, the second election, the gifts, the withdrawal, the 40-vote loss. A clean ledger. And Emily, smart, precise, capable Emily, who had absorbed her mother's lessons about how the world works, had walked into that clean ledger and applied herself and won. I don't know what to do with that even now. I've turned it over many times, looking at it from different angles. Because here is the part that is genuinely hard to argue with. Linda was not wrong about the mechanisms. The world does run on reciprocity and debt and the management of how people feel about you. Third graders are not uniquely immune to being influenced by who treated them well. Adults in boardrooms operate on the same principles with better vocabulary. What Linda taught Emily about how groups of people work, that information is true. It was always true. She just gave true information to an 8-year-old who trusted her completely, without putting any protective layer around it. No context, no nuance, no conversation about when those principles apply and when they don't, about what it means to use them on people who don't know you're using them, about the costs of that on the inside of yourself even when it works. Just, this is how the world works, act accordingly. And then when Emily did exactly that, when she followed her mother's instructions precisely, accurately to the letter, Linda hit her. Not because Emily did something wrong. Because Emily proved that Linda had. That's what the slap was really about. I don't say this as a condemnation. I've tried to resist that. I've tried to hold the whole picture instead of just the worst moment in it. Linda loved that child with a ferocity that was difficult to look at directly sometimes. The intensity with which she monitored Emily's withdrawal after the loss, the precision with which she noticed every small behavioral shift, that was love. The kind that keeps you awake, the kind that makes you reckless. The slap was love too, in a broken way. The violence of confronting the thing you've done to someone you love more than anything. I texted Linda a couple of weeks after that cafe conversation with the principal. Just how are things going? She wrote back immediately. Amazing, 3 exclamation points. I looked at the screen for a moment. Glad to hear it, I typed. And I was, mostly. Emily is probably in middle school now or close to it. I think about her more than I think about Linda, which surprises me when I notice it. I think about the way she sat in that cafe with her fingers against her cheek and her eyes open and that expression on her face, not pain but recognition. Understanding. The door swinging open. I think about the fact that she didn't ask what she'd done wrong because she already knew she hadn't done anything wrong. She'd followed the instructions exactly. And I wonder what she filed away that day. What she decided in the particular private space of a child's interior about mothers and instructions and the cost of following them and what it means to win. She's her mother's daughter. That much is clear. She learned the lessons. She found a context where they worked. She won. I hope she knows what it cost. I hope she decides somewhere down the line that she wants to win differently. I think she might. She seemed like the kind of person who notices things. The kind who keeps track. The kind who takes something from every situation and puts it somewhere useful. Maybe she already knows things that Linda is still figuring out. Maybe that's the only kind of forward that any of us can really manage. Not doing better than our parents did exactly, but doing it differently. Carrying the same understanding of the world they gave us and making different choices with it. I hope so. I don't know. I still think about that slap sometimes. Not with judgment. Not anymore, not really. More with the kind of recognition that comes when you see something true about what it means to be a person trying to protect the things you love from a world that isn't gentle with them. About how we give our children the tools we have, which are the tools that kept us alive, which are sometimes the tools that wound them. About how love and damage can travel in the same current, through the same hands, in the same direction. Linda wanted Emily to win. Emily won. I hope Linda knows what she paid for that. I hope Emily decides it was worth it. I don't know if either of those things is true.